Hello and welcome everyone out there on YouTube land. I am James of Cigar and Bar, and welcome to day 2 of the 12 Days of Christmas, where today I am going to be divulging my super secret mulled wine recipe. Now, mulled wine is a traditional recipe at Christmas time, and it involves a lot of usual baking spices, and I prefer to make mine in the German style that is served warm and proofed up a little bit with brandy. So we're going to go through the usual things I put in mine. It's a fairly simple recipe, and I encourage you to give it a try sometime this week. I start with, and I don't say this lightly, just about the worst wine I can find. I don't want to slag off the manufacturer of this particular wine, but it's sold in bulk for a reason. It's not a particularly good wine. This one is a Californian red. There are some really cheap wines I've encountered that I would not use for any purpose, but this is a wine that is not particularly good. It is a decent table wine if you're going to be drinking it with a lot of flavorful food. But if you can think of a brand of wine that you know of that doesn't really excel, doesn't really give you a lot of oomph, then take that and make it better. So I'm going to start here. I've got my pot on a hot plate. And I'm going to open up my bottle of wine here. I've got 2 of these big bottles of wine, and just right off the bat, I'm going to let you know this recipe with this quantity of spices makes 6 liters of wine. Now, I'm going to be using heat to accelerate the process of infusing the spices into the wine. And heat and alcohol can be a problem because alcohol will boil off a lot faster than water will. So you can lose a lot of your alcohol content. Now, in this case, it's not really that critical because I'm going to be adding more alcohol to it, adding some proofier brandy to the recipe. But that being said, I don't want to boil off all the alcohol or boil the wine to death. There's no need for that. and you do want to have some alcohol in there because we're going to be adding some other things to it that are oil-based. And like I've mentioned in the past for certain recipes, some things are hydrophilic and bond with water. Some things are oleophilic and bond with oil. And a lot of the things that you may want to infuse into a beverage will not readily bond with a water molecule. Alcohol is one of those molecules that is both hydrophilic and oleophilic. So you can take your water and your oil and your alcohol and combine it. So if there's no alcohol in here, you're not going to extract as much flavor out of specifically the citrus oils in the orange wine that we're going to be putting into this mulled wine. So you don't want to boil the hell out of it. You want to keep this to a high simmer at best. So I've got my hot plate here going, got the heat going. I've got 6 liters of wine over here. I'm going to start by making a starter batch, which if you were to drink straight would be really terrible. It would be really, really overly spiced. I'm going to take this first 3-liter bottle and without measuring in any way, shape, or form, I'm going to pour in about a liter and a half, about a half of this bottle. That should be good. There's enough liquid there in that pot that I can add the flavors to it. Next, I'm going to take some cinnamon. I usually use these little short sticks of cinnamon and just kind of break them up to increase the surface area. But today, when I went to the bulk barn, I couldn't find the little cinnamons, so I got a bunch of big cinnamons. Really big cinnamons. So if you want to get of the short sticks, not the really big sticks, you want to get about 6 of your normal 4-inch sticks of cinnamon and break that up in here. So I've broken up 2, and now I'm going to break up 1 big one. It doesn't need to be really finely broken up. Just expose some more surfaces in there. And that goes. On top of that, I'm going to add 10 whole cloves. And on top of that, I'm going to add 6 whole dried allspice berries. Also going to add the zest of 1 whole large navel orange. And just to go back to bar basics, if you're looking to take the zest off of this, the zest is the orange part on the outside and not the white pith underneath. So you can see, maybe you can't see, but on this particular stuff, there's very little white on there. It's mostly orange. I'm not skinning too deep because that pith will add more bitterness than I want. Now, it is also possible, because we're going to be adding a bunch of sweetness to this, if you want to, instead of putting the orange right in, make an oleosacrum, where you take the orange zest and you put it in equal parts sugar to create a syrup of mostly citrus oils and sugar. You can do that. But that is a process that is much more useful when you're dealing with cold beverages, because it's very difficult to get the citrus oils out of the orange zest at cold temperatures. But we're going to be simmering this, and there's going to be sugar in here, which, as I mentioned before, is an isotonic molecule which draws the moisture, draws the oils out of things. So you don't need to go about making an oleosacrum, but if you did, you would want to cut back on the amount of sweetness that you add to this, probably in half, because it's a lot of white granulated sugar that you'd put in there. Next, I'm going to add the juice of this whole orange, because a couple of reasons. One, I workshopped this without the juice and it didn't taste right. And two, once you've taken the zest off of it, the orange is only going to last for so long, it seems like a waste to not use the rest of the orange. So we're going to just squeeze it in there. You can, of course, use a pedestal juicer and really ream out all the juice that's in there. But just whatever you can squeeze out with your hands should be enough. Next, we're going to add our sweetness here. And you can use sugar. Like I said, you can use white sugar in an oleosacrum. You can use a demerara sugar if you want more of a molasses sweetness flavor. I like to use honey. And in my quest to be both thrifty and environmentally friendly, this lovely container of organic honey comes from the bulk barn. And I'm going to put in 1.5 cups of honey. Now, a lot of cocktails, a lot of drinks would call for a honey syrup. But honey syrup is really only necessary, again, like oleosaccharum, if you're working with a cold beverage. You're trying to get that liquid to dissolve into the rest of your beverage. This is going to be simmered, it's going to be hot, so I can add cold honey and I don't need to make it to be diluted in water. The only benefit is that I'm not going to have to wait quite so long as I am right now in waiting for it to pour out of the vessel, because it is cold and it is slow. It's not the best idea, but if you're trying to get all of the honey out of the vessel that you've used to do the measuring, you can just dunk the whole cup right in the hot mixture that you're making and use the heat and extra liquid to kind of dissolve more of that honey out of your measuring cup. Now finally, what I like to add is a little bit of nutmeg to be your last spice in there. And I know that you can use powdered nutmeg, or you could try to crack whole nutmegs, but they're actually harder than you think. If you want to try to put it in a nutcracker or smack with a hammer, you can, but you're still not going to get a good surface area. So I like to just grate a whole half of a whole nutmeg here right into the drink. Now, some of this is going to come out because we are going to be straining this through a sieve back into the same bottles. And some of it will be fine enough that it will stay in, but all of it should get enough surface area here to really infuse a high degree of nutmeggy flavor into this wine. And that's all that goes into this part of the batch. So I'm going to leave the hot plate on. I'm going to wait for it to simmer a little bit and to really extract the flavors and the things we put in there. And then we'll move on to the next step. I've let this simmer for about a half an hour now, and it smells strong. I'm going to give a taste to this now in its concentrated form, and I'm sure I won't like it by virtue of at least the amount of clove we've got in this. Oh, I was wrong. The clove is not the problem. The problem is the honey. This is very, very sweet, and underneath that sweetness, when the sweetness dies away, you taste the clove. It is very sweet. Oh yeah. That's just a mouthful of sugar. Oh. But that's okay, but this is just the starter batch. This is what we're getting that flavor into. So now I'm going to add the rest of my 6 liters of wine. And of course, I'm going to keep both the bottles and the caps because the wine is going back into these bottles after it's finished being mulled. Now, when I say that I simmered this, it was bubbling, it was steaming, it was not boiling. I did not have this at a rolling boil. Neither do I intend to bring it to a rolling boil, because again, I don't want to boil the hell out of it. But now that I've got all my wine in here, and it's all fairly cold, I'm going to give it a few minutes back up at that medium heat to just come back up to a warm temperature to combine all those flavors. The next thing I usually add to my batch here is to proof it up a little bit, and in the German Glühwein tradition, I like to add a little more oomph, so a little more distilled alcohol. I usually add brandy. Unfortunately today, I'm out of brandy, so I'm going to go off book a little bit and put in some cognac. So before I go ahead and just pour this in there, I'm going to give you some tasting notes on the cognac. Ah, that's a good cork. Let's do that again. Well, a little squeak, not so good that time. One more. That's a better cork. I like that. You know, as much brandy as I've had in my life, I've had very little cognac. And I'm just not sold on the extra price point, considering how much I like brandy and how much is cheaper than cognac. But let's see what the Courvoisier VS cognac tastes like today. It's a nuttier brandy. Yeah, it's got that wine brandy taste to it. It's just nuttier, which is nice. A little drier. And all we're really trying to do, adding the alcohol to this, it's going to proof it up a little higher than it was, but what we're trying to do is make sure that we replace the alcohol that may have boiled off with the simmering. Any loss of alcohol due to that heating. Now, I'm sure we haven't lost this much alcohol in the process, but my recipe calls for 6 ounces of brandy, in this case cognac, to be added to the batch. And truth be told, now that it's been brought up to temperature, it doesn't need to be done on the pot on the heating element. It's just convenient because it's all in one receptacle, all in one vessel right now, to add everything now. I want it to be identical for both of the bottles that I'm pouring it back into, so I might as well make sure it's identical in the pot that's already in. So it's all ready to go now. It's warm and combined and got every ingredient that needs to be in there, so we're ready to give this a taste. Of course, I will be straining this into the bottles because of the various cloves and allspice berries and cinnamon stick that's in the bottom along with the orange rinds. But at the moment, really the only thing that's sitting on the top is going to be the nutmeg, and from the looks of it, it's going to be too small to strain anyways, and that's fine. You can keep the nutmeg in there. So I am going to scoop myself off some wine and taste it, but first I'm going to get this prepared. Is what I usually do, again in the German Glühwein mulled wine tradition, is I make almost a mulled wine cocktail out of it. I add 1 ounce of brandy, which is in this case cognac, and then I top up my vessel here most of the way. No need to be silly and fill it up right to the brim. I got plenty of it here. I can go back for more. And what I usually garnish these with is usually a cinnamon stick, but in this case I'm going to skip that, but I do have one other garnish that I usually add to these. These are little dried orange pinwheels. And these ones specifically have been made from blood orange, so it gives you that lovely dark color. It's really easy to make these. You take your orange and you slice them into 1/4-inch medallions, and you lay them on a baking tray on some parchment paper at very low temperature. I'm talking like 200 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven. And you sprinkle just a little bit of sugar on top of each medallion. And then you let them sit there in the oven until they are dried and hard. And you take them out, and they are, let's get the sound here, very dried. And they got this brown rind and this like jet black flesh to them. They look really cool. I know some people like to float a star anise on the top because that looks very cool. It's a really cool flavor. I think that this takes a cake for a mulled wine garnish. And what's good about this is that it will impart just a little more orange flavor to the mulled wine, and it will rehydrate and become soft and kind of lighten in color as you sit it on top of your warm mulled wine beverage. So let's give it a taste and see what we've got here. Oh, that's good. It's orangey, it's spicy. And I think a lot of that spice is coming from the allspice and the clove. It's more than just cinnamon and nutmeg. And it's sweet. You can taste the honey, but the honey is not overpowering. And it does have a bit of a sharpness to it because of the cognac that we added to it. It tastes strong. It tastes like wine. And it's like fruit and baking spice. This is a delightful warm beverage. Some people drink mulled wine cold. I think that would be just as detrimental as drinking any kind of red wine cold. There's so much more flavor there that can be had. Particularly in this case, where this is a red wine that I don't really like. I don't think it's a particularly good red wine that I've added so much more flavor to. I don't want to bury any of that by serving it at a colder temperature. So this, definitely serve it warm. I want to thank you for joining me here on day 2 of our 12 Days of Christmas with my 2022 recipe for Christmas mulled wine. If you give it a try, please let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. If you have any other things that you usually add to your own mulled wine, please let me know, and maybe I'll add that to 2023's recipe. But for now, I'm going to sign off and say I'll see you tomorrow with the 3rd day of the 12 Days of Christmas. And I wish everyone out there in YouTube land a very Merry Christmas. I hope Mike Tyson was good to you on Boxing Day. And we will see you tomorrow. Cheers.